There are 5 different money traps hiding in personal finances right now, and one of them starts working on you before you're even old enough to understand what money actually is. Each one wears a completely different costume, depending on which decade you were born in, which is exactly why most people never connect the dots between their own struggle and their parents' struggle, or their kids' struggle either. This video breaks down every single one for each generation alive today, in the exact order they typically show up across a person's life, from the earliest to the most recently discovered. By the end, you'll know exactly which version already has you and the one move that breaks it, regardless of your age or income bracket. Here's why this isn't just a history lesson about somebody else's spending habits. Every one of these traps is currently active in your own bank account right now, whether you're 18 or 80. Financial advice usually gets passed down in exactly the wrong direction. Older generations tell younger ones to simply save more, without realizing their own generation fell into a completely different version of the exact same hole, one that had nothing to do with willpower either. If you've ever felt behind compared to people your age, or confused about why doing everything responsibly still leaves you anxious about money, this video shows you precisely where that feeling actually comes from and why the advice you've been given so far probably wasn't built for your specific version of the problem. This isn't about blaming any single generation, and it isn't about which one had it easier, because every generation has a legitimate case for being the hardest hit. It's about naming the exact mechanism quietly draining money before it ever reaches savings, so you can shut it off today, no matter which decade you happen to be born in. Understanding your specific version also changes how you talk to family members stuck in a different one. Instead of both sides quietly assuming the other person is simply bad with money, when really they're just running a different version of the exact same script. Let's start with the version that hit the generation currently in their 70s and 80s. The pension mirage trap. This is trusting an employer's promised pension or Social Security alone to fully cover retirement instead of building a personal investment account on the side. What makes this trap different from every other one on this list is that it usually wasn't caused by overspending at all. Most people who fell into it paid off their mortgage early, drove the same car for decades, and never once carried a credit card balance, which makes the eventual shortfall feel especially unfair in hindsight. The surprising number here is that roughly 38% of private sector workers had a traditional pension in the early 1980s. And today, that figure sits under 20%. With a large share of that collapse happening mid-career, after people had already built their entire retirement plan around a promise that quietly disappeared without any warning letter in the mail. This trap is most dangerous for anyone who stayed loyal to a single employer for decades, assuming that loyalty would be automatically repaid on the way out. Nobody ever sits an employee down and tells them the promise could quietly shrink while they weren't watching, and by the time the letter arrives, there's rarely enough runway left to build an alternative plan. The next one belongs to the generation currently in their 50s, the sandwich squeeze trap. This is being financially responsible for aging parents and adult or teenage children at the exact same time. So retirement savings gets whatever happens to be left over, which is usually nothing. Unlike the previous trap, this one isn't about trusting an institution, it's about obligation, stacking in 2 directions at once. And neither direction ever feels optional when you're the one being asked. A surprising and widely cited figure is that roughly 54% of Americans in their 40s currently have a living parent aged 65 or older, while also raising or financially supporting a child, meaning more than half of that entire age group is funding to households simultaneously out of a single paycheck, often without either household fully realizing how thin the middle actually is. This trap is most dangerous for anyone who feels guilty saying no to either generation depending on them, because saying yes to both at once is exactly what drains the middle out completely, one reasonable request at a time. Neither request ever feels like the one that finally broke the budget, which is precisely why nobody catches the total until years later. But the next one surprises almost everyone, because it looks like the opposite of laziness, the hustle treadmill trap. This is stacking multiple side jobs and gig work, believing extra hustle automatically builds wealth, when in reality, it often just trades free time for low-margin work that never becomes an actual asset. Plenty of people drive for rideshare apps, Most weeknights or pick up freelance work on weekends and end up exhausted without saving anything meaningful at the end of the month. Despite genuinely working more hours than almost anyone else in their circle, the surprising data point here is that while average side hustle income gets reported around $900 a month, the median side hustler, meaning the person right in the middle, once the small number of big earners gets removed from the math, brings in closer to $200 a month, which barely covers the added gas, equipment, and taxes the hustle itself creates in the first place. This trap is most dangerous for anyone measuring their financial progress by how busy they feel, instead of how much they've actually kept at the end of it. Exhaustion isn't proof of progress, no matter how convincing it feels in the moment. And a packed calendar can look identical to real momentum until you actually check the bank balance. Now here's one that hides inside dozens of tiny charges. Instead of one big decision, the subscription drip trap. This is stacking small recurring payments, streaming apps, memberships, that each individually feel too small to matter, but combined quietly consume a real share of monthly income. Most people don't feel like they're overspending. They just have a lot of small, forgettable charges hitting their card on different days spread across the month. None of them big enough to notice on their own. The surprising part is how large the perception gap actually is. Surveyed consumers guess they spend somewhere around $90 a month on subscriptions. But once every recurring charge gets added up line by line, the real average lands closer to $220. And Gen Z specifically spends the most of any generation, close to $370 a month, without most of them realizing the total. This trap is most dangerous for anyone who has never once sat down and listed every single recurring charge hitting their account in a given month. That list is usually the most uncomfortable 5 minutes of the entire process, mostly because of how many forgotten free trials quietly turned into permanent charges months ago. But the last one might be the most important, because it's already being installed before anyone even earns their first paycheck: the invisible wallet trap. This is growing up making purchases through a parent's saved payment method, or in-game currency, absorbing the idea that money is an abstract, limitless number long before ever feeling the discomfort of physically running out of cash in your own hand. An entire generation of kids has never once had to hand over a bill and watch it disappear, or wait, save, and feel a purchase actually cost them something real. A surprising and slightly unsettling fact is that around 61% of kids are now making in-app purchases on a monthly basis. And in one survey, more than a third of children couldn't correctly explain how a digital purchase even gets paid for in the first place. This trap is most dangerous for an entire generation that may reach adulthood having never once physically felt money leave their possession. What never gets felt never gets respected, and that single sentence explains the entire mechanism repeating itself quietly in millions of households at once. So, out of every trap we just went through, which one actually matters the most? Here's the twist that surprises almost everyone. It's not the pension mirage trap, it's not the sandwich squeeze, and it isn't even the hustle treadmill, as damaging as that one clearly is. The trap that quietly sets up all the others is the smallest, youngest-looking one on this entire list: the invisible wallet trap. Here's why. Once you spend your entire childhood managing money as an abstract number instead of something with a felt, physical cost, every recurring commitment that shows up later in life gets dramatically easier to ignore. A pension promise, a family obligation, a stacked side hustle, a subscription bill. They're all just numbers on a screen to someone who's never learned to feel money leave their hands. Kids growing up today aren't destined to repeat their grandparents' exact mistakes decades from now. They're being trained right now to make all 4 of the other traps feel completely invisible by the time they're old enough to actually fall into one of them. That's what makes this specific trap worth naming before the rest, not because it's the most expensive one today, but because it's the one quietly writing the rules for every trap that follows it, decades before anyone notices. The pattern repeating. So here's what actually matters from everything we just covered. Every generation alive today is currently living inside its own disguised version of the exact same trap. And the earliest one, the one currently forming inside kids barely old enough to hold a tablet, is quietly seeding every trap that follows it decades later. These traps only survive because nobody ever actually sits down and lists every recurring commitment currently draining their account, one by one, in plain daylight, without the comfortable fog of not really wanting to know the total. And that's the part most financial advice completely misses, because it treats every generation's number as if it came from the same root cause. Which one of these traps did you already recognize in your own life? Was it the pension mirage, the sandwich squeeze, the subscription drip, or one I didn't even mention here today? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this changed how you think about money across your entire family, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.